Hello, my name is Rachel Carter, and I'm 32 years old. I live a simple life, running a small cafe in a quiet town far from the hustle and bustle of the city. It's been years since I last spoke to my father, William Carter, a successful businessman who built a massive empire in the heart of Chicago. Our relationship has always been strained. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps, but I chose a different path, a simpler, happier life. That decision built a wall between us, and neither of us seemed willing to break it down. One evening, as I was closing the cafe, my phone rang. It was my mother, Margaret Carter. Her warm and caring voice had always comforted me, but this time, it carried a heavy tone. "Rachel," she began, "your father's 65th birthday is coming up, and I want you to come home." I hesitated. Going back home meant confronting old wounds and unresolved issues. "Mom, I don't think Dad wants to see me," I said cautiously. "He won't say it, but he needs you there," she insisted. "Please, Rachel. Do it for me." After a pause, I agreed. "All right, Mom. I'll come." The decision filled me with mixed emotions. I loved my mother dearly, but going back meant stepping into a world I had left behind, a world filled with expectations, competition, and conflicts with my two older brothers, Adam and James. I hadn't seen them in years either. Adam, the eldest, was the golden child who ran the family business. James, the middle brother, always felt overshadowed by Adam. And then there was me, the black sheep who had walked away. The day I arrived at the Carter mansion, everything looked the same, grand and imposing, a symbol of my father's power. As I walked through the gates, unease settled over me. My mother greeted me warmly, pulling me into a tight hug. "It's so good to see you," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "It's good to see you too, Mom," I replied with a faint smile. Inside, the house was buzzing with party preparations. Adam was barking orders at the staff, while James stood off to the side, scrolling through his phone, looking uninterested. When Adam noticed me, his smile was tight and insincere. "Rachel," he said, walking over. "I didn't think you'd show up." "Nice to see you too, Adam," I said, keeping my tone even. James gave me a quick nod and muttered, "Long time no see." The tension was thick, but I focused on my mother and the reason I was there. As the hours passed, I noticed cracks in the family's polished image. Adam was snapping at everyone, James seemed distant, and my father, when he appeared briefly, looked more tired than I'd ever seen him. That night, as I lay in the guest room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I had come home for celebration, but it felt like I'd walked into the middle of a brewing storm. The next morning, the mansion was chaotic as final preparations for my father's 65th birthday party were in full swing. Staff rushed around with trays of food, flower arrangements, and decorations, while Adam argued with James over seating arrangements. I stayed in the background, watching the whirlwind of activity. It reminded me of why I had left this life behind. My mother found me sipping coffee in a quiet corner of the living room. "Rachel, could you talk to your father today?" she asked gently. "He won't say it, but he's missed you." I hesitated. "I'll try, Mom." When the party began, guests filled the grand hall of the mansion. The room sparkled with wealth and luxury, crystal chandeliers, elegant decorations, and people dressed to impress. Adam was in his element, mingling with influential business figures, while James hovered near the bar with a drink in hand. My father entered last, greeted by applause and cheers. Even at 65, William Carter had an aura of authority. His sharp suit and confident posture reflected the man who had built an empire. But there was a tiredness in his eyes that was hard to ignore. As he moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, he suddenly spotted me across the room. His expression froze briefly before he gave a small nod. It wasn't much, but it was more than I had expected. During his speech, my father spoke about his achievements, the importance of family, and the journey that brought him here. Then, to my surprise, he looked directly at me. "It's good to have all my children here tonight," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard. His words caught me off guard, but I remained seated, unsure how to respond. As the evening wound down, my father approached me. The guests were thinning out, and the room was quieter. "Rachel," he said, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of emotion, "I'm glad you came." "Mom asked me to," I replied honestly. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "She always knows how to get through to you. I hope this means you're ready to be part of the family again." I took a deep breath. "I've always been part of the family, Dad. I just chose a different path." His jaw tightened, but instead of arguing, he sighed deeply. "We'll talk later," he said before walking away. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind raced. The party had ended on a high note for the guests, but tension lingered within the family. Something felt off, as if the night had only scratched the surface of deeper issues. The next morning, during breakfast, my father joined us at the dining table. He looked pale and moved slowly. Just as he reached for his coffee, he suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed.
"Dad!"
I shouted, rushing to his side. The room erupted into chaos. My mother screamed, Adam grabbed his phone to call for an ambulance, and James stood frozen. Within minutes, paramedics arrived and rushed my father to the hospital. Hours later, we sat in the waiting room, anxiously awaiting news. The doctor finally approached us, his face grim. "Mr. Carter has advanced stage cancer. He has only a few months left." The news hit us like a thunderclap. My mother broke down in tears, while Adam and James sat in stunned silence. I felt a swirl of emotions, grief, regret, and a gnawing sense of uncertainty. When we returned home, my father called us to his study. Though he looked frail, his voice was determined. "I don't have much time left," he began, "and I need to ensure the family and the business are in good hands. I've made my decision." We all leaned in, bracing ourselves. "I'm naming Rachel as my successor." The room fell silent. Adam's face turned red with anger, and James stared at my father, incredulous. "You can't be serious," Adam snapped. "She's been gone for years. She doesn't know how to run this business." My father's tone was firm. "Rachel has the values and integrity this family needs. That's what matters most." Adam stormed out, slamming the door, while James muttered, "This is a mistake," and followed him. My mother placed a comforting hand on my shoulder while I sat there, stunned. I had never asked for this role, but now it was mine. The days following my father's announcement were tense. The news of my new role spread quickly, both within the family and the company. While my mother supported me, Adam and James made their resentment clear. Their anger hung in the air, turning every interaction into a battlefield of sharp words and cold stares. I wasn't even sure I wanted this responsibility. Running a massive company wasn't part of my life plan. But every time I considered stepping away, the thought of my father's faith in me and the hope in my mother's eyes gave me strength. One morning, as I sat in my father's office reviewing financial reports, Adam stormed in, slamming a folder onto the desk. "This is ridiculous, Rachel," he spat. "You've been here for what? A week? And now you think you can run this company?" I looked up, keeping my tone calm. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Adam. I just want to make sure the business is stable." "Stable?" He scoffed. "Do you even know what it takes to keep this empire running? While you've been serving coffee, I've been closing billion-dollar deals." "I'm not pretending to know everything," I replied evenly. "But I'll learn." Adam leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. "You'll fail. And when you do, don't expect me to clean up your mess." Before I could respond, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. His bitterness wasn't just about the company, it was personal. He felt betrayed, and in a way, I understood. But I couldn't let his anger derail me. As I settled into my role, I started noticing discrepancies in the financial records. Large sums of money were unaccounted for, and deals had been made with questionable partners. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but as I dug deeper, a disturbing pattern emerged. One evening, I confronted the company's CFO, a trusted employee of my father. "Can you explain these transactions?" I asked, pointing to a series of suspicious payments. He hesitated before admitting these were authorized by Adam. He said they were for securing partnerships. My stomach dropped. Adam had been embezzling money, and covering it up. This wasn't just about family drama anymore. It was about protecting my father's legacy. That night, I found Adam in the mansion's library, a glass of whiskey in hand. "Adam, we need to talk," I said firmly, stepping inside. He looked up, his expression guarded. "What now?" "I know about the missing money," I said, cutting straight to the point. "And I know you're behind it." His face darkened. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I have proof," I said, holding my ground. "You've been stealing from a company." Adam stood, his voice rising. "Do you think this business runs on honesty and good intentions? I've done what's necessary to keep it afloat." "You've betrayed everything Dad built," I said, my anger barely contained. Adam's jaw tightened. "If you think you can ruin me, think again. I've sacrificed too much for this family to let you take it all away." He stormed past me, leaving me alone with the weight of his words. It was clear that Adam wasn't just angry. He was desperate. The next day, I received news that shook me to my core. Adam had partnered with Andrew Harrington, a ruthless businessman who had been trying to buy out our company for years. Together, they were planning a hostile takeover. When I told my father, his face turned pale. "Adam has always been ambitious," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "But I never thought he'd stoop this low." Even James sided with Adam, saying, "At least Adam knows what he's doing." "You're in over your head, Rachel." Their betrayal stung, but I refused to give up. If I didn't fight for the company, everything my father had built would fall into the hands of someone like Harrington, who would tear it apart. With the help of the CFO and a few trusted employees, I began to gather evidence of Harrington's illegal activities. The deeper I dug, the more damning the evidence became. Harrington and Adam's takeover plan relied on fraudulent contracts and forged documents. One evening, as I prepared to present my findings to the board, I received a call from my mother. "Rachel, come home now," she said, her voice trembling. "Your father isn't doing well." I rushed back to the mansion and found my father in his study, looking frail but determined. He motioned for me to sit beside him. "Rachel," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm proud of you. You've fought harder for this family than I ever expected. But you need to be careful. Adam is desperate, and desperate people can be dangerous." His words sent a chill through me. I promised him I would protect the family and the company, no matter what it took. The next day, I called for an emergency board meeting to present the evidence. As I entered the boardroom, Adam and Harrington were already there, their smug expressions daring me to challenge them. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "I've uncovered evidence of serious fraud involving Adam and Mr. Harrington. These documents prove their actions." I handed the evidence to the board, and the room fell silent as they reviewed it. Adam's face turned red with anger. "This is a setup," he shouted. "Rachel is trying to ruin me." "I don't need to ruin you, Adam," I said calmly. "You've done that yourself." The board unanimously voted to block Harrington's takeover and launch an investigation into Adam's actions. After the meeting, Adam confronted me in the mansion's driveway. His eyes burned with rage. "You think you've won, don't you?" he spat. "You've turned this family against me." "No, Adam," I said firmly. "You did that when you chose greed over loyalty." Adam lunged at me, but James stepped in, holding him back. "Enough, Adam," James said, his voice tired. "You've already done enough damage." Adam pushed him away and stormed off, leaving behind a fractured family. With Adam out of the picture and Harrington exposed, I focused on rebuilding the company's reputation. It was hard work, but with support from my mother and a few loyal employees, we began to see progress. One evening, my father called me to his room. His health had worsened, but his spirit remained strong. "Rachel," he said, his voice soft but steady, "you've done more for this family than I ever imagined. You've shown that leadership isn't about power, it's about integrity." A week later, he passed away peacefully, surrounded by family. His loss was a heavy blow, but it also brought us closer together. Even James began to see the value of unity. Months later, the company was thriving under my leadership. Adam had disappeared from our lives, and James had become an ally. As I stood in the mansion's garden one evening, my mother joined me. Your father would be so proud of you, she said, her voice filled with warmth. I nodded, a sense of peace washing over me. This wasn't the life I planned, Mom, I admitted. But I think it's the life I was meant to have. The Carter family had weathered its storms, and together, we emerged stronger. My father's legacy wasn't just about the business. It was about the values he had instilled in us. Honesty, loyalty, and the strength of family. Now, it was my turn to carry that legacy forward.